Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first session today. I am joined today by Paul Zak. Him and I have worked together in the past, and he is a scientist, entrepreneur, and author of several books. His newest book, Trust Factor, The Science of Creating High-Performance Companies, is one you should definitely check out. And today he's here to talk to us about a solution that him and his team put together called Immersion, which measures and predicts what your audience will buy, how they engage with it, and the ability to measure psychological safety. With that, I'll turn it over to Paul for a session. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and welcome everybody. Good morning. So we're going to talk today about the science of immersive learning. So how do we actually get people to care about the material that they are being presented? And it's hard. So from a neuroscience perspective, learning requires the brain expend metabolic energy, and your brain is an energy hog, and so it wants to modulate that energy, and that's why we space out a lot. It's hard to stay in the zone to really absorb effectively, and so one way to do that is to actually measure the brain's responses. So I'm going to talk about what we've learned on the science of immersive learning, and then I'll have a session later today at sometime that now I've forgotten, I think 1 Eastern, in which I'll talk. Now it must be some other time, 12 Eastern. Someone will tell me in the chat, in which actually we'll talk about having clients use this neuroscience technology for the last 3 years. What are the key takeaways? So for today, this session this morning, we'll talk about the science. I'll actually show you the data coming in live. I'm measuring myself right now. We'll see how immersive I am presenting this information to you. So that's where we're going. And I think Michelle and I were talking off air before we started, and measurement is the key. We've got to really measure how effectively we as trainers are able to create content, present content, and equally important, are people absorbing? Is everyone absorbing it? Is it being absorbed on average? So this is work that came out of my academic lab at Claremont Graduate University the last 20 years of understanding the signals coming from the brain that allow us to capture how much the brain values an experience. So it's even worse now, right? We're all in this remote world, and I think, at least for most of us, we're not going to go back to in the office congregating shoulder to shoulder for training. A lot of that's going to be remote, and I think that's a great thing. I think we have an opportunity to learn when we're ready to learn, when we have sort of space in our schedules to learn. You can learn at scale, but we also face those distractions. So I do think it's wonderful when we're all on video conferencing and someone's toddler runs into the room, or you hear the dog bark. That's normal life. That's what humans live with. Yet, those distractions, again, they're going to take some of that bandwidth out of the brain. So how do we actually know if you're learning at home that learning is being effective? And just clicking through is not only there. So as Michelle said, about 3 years ago, we launched a Neuroscience as a Service platform that pulls data from people's smartwatches and lets us infer what the brain is doing second by second, so that we can identify how effectively that information is getting in people's brains. And we built this technology backwards. I'm going to go through the science in just a minute. Almost all that science, other than the key algorithms, are published. You can find them online. You can read them yourself. So what we discovered is that what the brain values is what people remember, right? And that's really the goal, I think, or at least the initial goal in training, is to get to people to really absorb this information and have it stored in the brain that makes it easily accessible. So we find that this neurologic measure we call immersion, which I'll define for you in a moment, correlates with information recall weeks later at 0.6, right? So the more immersed I can get people in a training to be, the more they can use that information later, and therefore that's going to drive up their productivity. So really very serious about getting the measurement right, so that training professionals can begin to tweak not only the content, but the delivery. And we'll see that immersion captures both those. And so there's a way to do that. So as I said, we pull data from learners' own smartwatches that goes into the cloud. we apply algorithms that we've derived over time that let us take the activity from the cranial nerves in the neck, which innervate the heart and the gut. And from that, we can infer exactly what the brain's doing. And you can watch that second by second and ask whether this training is being effective and for whom. I think those are really important issues. So a couple of slides on the science, and then I'm actually going to show you some data, and then we'll have time for questions. So this came out of work I did in the last, 25 years on the neurochemical oxytocin. So my lab was the first to develop a protocol to measure the brain's acute production of oxytocin in humans. We also developed a way to safely administer synthetic oxytocin to humans. And we showed that oxytocin is this key neurochemical that tells us that those around us are safe or trustworthy. It motivates us to engage with them. So going backwards, we had funding from DARPA and some other letter agencies of the US government that asked us, could we identify neurologic signals that would tell us what people would do after an experience? And if we could do that, it had to be, the term of art is statistically robust. It had to do this over and over and over, right? So if we found some fleeting signals in the brain that sometimes predicted and sometimes didn't, that's not very useful. So we basically measured hundreds of brain signals simultaneously at very high frequency, up to 1,000 times a second. And over many, many years in experiments, winnowed those down to find combinations of signals that together would tell us that this experience was so valuable that my brain tagged it as important, and it's going to be absorbed effectively into the brain. So it's a very interesting technology because we've made it available to everybody. So it's out of the lab into the actual world. So there's a funny picture of me with a high-density electrocardiogram on my head. So again, lots of science behind this that I don't have time to go through, but happy to have you guys ask questions or just Google my name in Google Scholar, and you can download a lot of those for free. But we not only measured hundreds of signals simultaneously, but we used drug studies to turn on different pathways in the brain and ensure that what we measure in the peripheral nervous system, which we can, again, pull from a smartwatch, is in fact related to what's going on in the central nervous system, in the brain. And then we took these signals, and I like to say we did unnatural things to natural data. We combined them in ways that are not typically what come out of neuroscience measurement technologies in order to maximize their predictive ability. So ultimately, Immersion, the technology, the software was designed so that it would most accurately predict what people would do after an experience, such as what they would remember after training. So what is immersion? It has two core components in the brain. One is attention. Attention comes from the brain's prefrontal cortex. If you're not paying attention to what I'm saying, if you're asleep, if you're in a different room, you're not going to remember this experience. It's not going to be effective for you. And the second is what I call emotional resonance. You actually have to care about it, right? So that's, I think, the harder part. So attention is much more like a 0-1 variable. As we look at the data, most of the variation in immersion is due to how much I'm able to get you to care about what I'm saying. And so if I can somehow present the information, craft the information so that you go, oh, wow, this is fascinating, this is important, this is valuable, then I'm much more immersed in it. And for that reason, you're going to actually remember it more effectively. So, okay, so now that we know what immersion is, it's this interesting state which I am attentive and I really care about the experience. How do we do it? So this is what we built in the last 3 years. You put in a calendar invite for your training, whether in person or virtual. The platform sends an invite to attendees. When they get to the training, they press join on their smartwatch. The platform starts picking up data automatically. We have you press join so that everyone knows that they're opting in to get their data collected. They have to download an app to their smartphone in advance. You do your training, and using cloud computing, we actually can get neurologic data in real time. So for the first time, instructors can actually look at this data while they're in training and adjust, pivot, take breaks so that you actually can know how effectively that information is getting through. So again, my second session later today, we'll actually talk about a lot of takeaways that clients have learned from doing 3 years of training and measuring neurologic immersion. And lastly, Michelle said nicely in the introduction, we also developed, I think, the first physiologic measure of psychological safety. That's readiness to learn. If you're not ready to learn, if you don't have the bandwidth, if you can't focus, then that training is not going to be effective. I'm not going to be able to immerse you. And so by monitoring psychological safety, you're able to assess when people need a break. Do we need to do 3 minutes of just kind of closing our eyes and focusing before we get started? And so we find a strong negative correlation between psychological safety and immersion. So psychological safety is the precursor to having an immersive training experience. If you're not psychologically safe, then we've got to deal with that issue first. And as you guys know, the work out of Google some years ago showed psychological safety was the most predictive factor of whether teams would perform at high levels. And Google used a kind of a survey, a self-report. We're getting this physiologically, so we're getting it second by second. And then importantly, as I said, we built immersion in the science and experiments we did that optimize these neurologic signals to predict outcomes. Again, not feelings. It's nice if you enjoy it. And in fact, immersive experiences generally are quite enjoyable, but the technology was built specifically to predict things like information recall. And so from a training perspective, it allows trainers to show that they are moving towards the organization's OKRs. So I'm going to summarize that, and then we'll look at some data in real time. So here's the way that clients are using this. And again, I'll give you lots of examples of how you can use it in your daily practice in my second session later today. One is you want to ask, is this training good or bad? So that's the question on benchmarks. Right? Is this above or below benchmark? For the folks in the room, for the folks doing the training, was it above the benchmark or below the benchmark? So with thousands of observations that make up these benchmarks, and the platform will show immediately if this is above benchmark or below benchmark. So that's the first kind of metric you want to manage. If it's below benchmark, we want to ask, okay, how can we improve it? And I'll show you that in just a second. The second is, again, this is meant to predict outcome measures, performance measures. So I think it's really important that trainers identify how they're moving forward on the KPIs of the organization and how training helps the organization reach those KPIs. So again, a knowledge retention would be the first, but certainly wouldn't be the only. And then relating the metrics on the platform to that, to those KPIs are really important. Third, as you know, there's this old saying in medical training: see one, do one, teach one. And so I think it's very important that people practice what they are being trained to do. And so the platform gives you a leaderboard. So it identifies what we call immersion champions. These are the folks in the room or remotely who really understood the information, and they are the perfect people to be peer discussion leaders. So they leverage the training that you've organized so that they can facilitate peer discussions as you begin to practice this work. So it's really important that you have evangelists within your group of trainees that allow the information that you're presenting to them to be shared and reinforced, and that leaderboard will tell you who those people are. Then lastly, some people are going to be frustrated in the training. I have a bit of an accent, I know that. Some people maybe just can't follow me because of my accent. That's okay, that's on me, right? If I'm training, it's on me. But knowing how many people are frustrated in the room and then need a follow-up. They need a link to a different training and need some other kind of way to acquire the material. It's really important. Again, it's a metric you can measure that over time we've improved our training, so the number of people who are frustrated has gone down. And again, it's on us to identify those who need additional help so that everyone is up to the same level. This training has been effective for everybody. So it allows you to customize that training either in real time or ex post so that everybody is effectively trained. And then we have clients who use this technology so that they can identify trainees who are ready to move forward in their career. So ready for a promotion, ready to move on to their next task, ready to manage a bigger team, because we know they've effectively understood the material. And as I said earlier, and have practiced it. So it's a really nice tool to have, and it's been fun to see it develop. So summarizing, and then data, and then questions. So what we find is that people will remember the material that occurs at immersion peaks. So in terms of curating the material that you are going to present, the content, you can test it, you can review that content, you can audit previous trainings. If you record them, audio or video, the platform will overlay the data on that training. And if you think of the 3 or 4 most important things that are going on in that, say, hour training, if those can occur at immersion peaks, they're more likely to be remembered. So that's important. As I said, you want to look at how effective the training is overall. You want to track training improvement to show the value that training creates for the organization. Reduce frustration and potentially pivot training in real time if people are beginning to tune out. The first thing you do in the room is measure psychological safety. If people are not psychologically safe, then you need to establish this kind of safe environment. And we find in client data that effective trainers actually increase psychological safety over the course of an hour of training. So people are really engaged, they feel relaxed, they get to know each other. So Ken, I'm going to give you in my second session today a lot of take-homes, specific ways each of these 6 points can be affected. And lastly, trainees will get feedback from their own smart devices, and they'll begin to self-manage. So they'll see if they have absorbed the material effectively or not. And if they've done that, then awesome, move forward. If they haven't, they can go back and review, particularly when we're in this remote asynchronous world. Great, take a break, and then tomorrow, go review that training again, right? That didn't seem like it got into your brain as well as we would expect it to. So yeah, just manage your own training. So it's a wonderful tool. So I'm a big believer in science getting rid of BS. So that's why we do science. We want to get rid of the BS in the system. And I'm going to share you some real-time data right now. I'm going to do a different share screen. And so I have my wearable on, and you should be able to see this right now. So here's me talking. And again, the platform's picking up my own data. I put a marker in here, if you can see it on my mouse. This is where the session started. This is where Michelle introduced me. We were chit-chatting over here. Here's probably when I started speaking. And now I'm in the groove, right? I'm seeing second by second how effectively I'm immersing information. And we built this platform so that you don't need a PhD in data analytics to understand the data. It's normalized to run from 0 to 10. It's linear. 6 is twice as good as a 3. So second by second, you can see how effectively a room full of people, yourself, are immersed in training or other factors as well. So real simple to use. Again, use the smartwatch. And the most important thing from my perspective is highly predictive, right? It really predicts outcomes so that as trainers, you can ensure that you are in fact working towards that organization's KPIs and that training is effectively participating in that. And then if I end this data collection, I'll get some metrics. And so I'll see how effective was this presentation. So it's Awesome Index as a kind of benchmark that's good or bad. And so this runs 0 to 100, benchmarks at 50. I'm right on benchmark. Look at that. So good day for me. This is psychological safety. I feel very safe talking to you people. How nice that is. And here's my overall immersion across the event. And these wow and blah are the peaks and valleys. And you can manage those for higher information retention. So excellent. I want to take a couple of questions. I'm not going to call out names, but if it's okay, Michelle, I can see some in the chat. So someone said this looks like flow. So very close. So flow is a little different. Flow is a psychological state of concentrated practice. So immersion is a neurologic state that can be active or passive. So you can sit in a movie and be immersed in it, and we know that because people cry at the end of movies, and that's when you're again that high emotional resonance. You're sharing the the information, the emotional resonance. You're sharing the resonance of the characters. Sorry, I'm trying to talk and read it. Private concerns. So no personally identifiable information goes online. Individuals get a secret code for their data. They can see their own data, but trainers only get aggregated data. unless you as a trainee want to go and talk to your trainer about that data. So again, individuals get feedback, but there's no there's no names associated with this. Yeah, and I think 3 of the 5 FANG companies now use our technology to manage their training and their meetings, team meetings. So we've been through the ringer on the privacy issue. Let's see. How do we know people are not more immersed simply because they know they're being monitored? That's a great question. So there's a little bit of a cheat in here, which is when you first punch yes, you go, oh yeah, they're measuring how effectively this training is. So at first, again, people are a little more attentive. But again, most of that variation in immersion is due to the emotional component, and the attentional one is just it's just get you in the door. You've actually got to get people to care about this. And so generally they forget that they're being monitored at a short period of time. So, that little cheat that I know I'm being monitored is not going to, last for too long. So, so I think it's getting people in that zone where they can effectively absorb the information. So you can think of psychological safety as the kind of opposite of anxiety. So if I'm anxious, I'm just trying to get through the next 10 minutes, right? I don't have a lot of bandwidth to take in new information. And so establishing that psychological safety, which I'll talk about in some detail in my second session today, is similar. And I should say, Mike Csikszentmihalyi was a colleague of mine at Claremont Graduate University for many years, as a friend, and just retired, actually. I think he's about 78 or 79, I want to say. So, it was great to know him for so many years. Okay, I'm going to look at some other questions. How can you participate in research? It's commercial technology, so it's a piece of software. So we're not doing research on this. This is available to organizations around the world and used by organizations around the world. So the 20 years of R&D is done. Now it's application. I think it's great to have that metric. So as I'll talk about in the second session, one of our longest term clients is Accenture. They've been very public about using immersion to optimize their training. So Accenture does $1 billion of training annually, just amazing scale. And they never had a really good way to begin, not only to improve the content delivery on average, but again, to begin to specialize. So if we have training programs that are given in the US, in Mexico, in Guatemala, in Brazil, those need to be a little bit different, right? Those are different locations. Maybe they're covering the same material, but the way they present it's got to be different. So how do we, begin to optimize that and then show objectively that, we're really making progress for the organization? So the nice thing about this immersion measure is that it comes from the brainstem. You can't affect it, consciously. So I can't cheat, right? Either I'm actually, effectively immersing my audience in this material, or I'm not. Anyway, let's see other comments. Anything I'm missing, Michelle? Let's see. Cost reason the program depends on how much you use it, but it's all affordable. So anyway, you can.
All right, I think that is the bulk of the questions that we have. So again, if you guys are interested in joining the session later today, that will be at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That will be kind of the deeper dive into the technology. We posted some items out here for you, so the link to getimmersion.com, so you can check that out, as well as the Accenture article on the research that was done on some of the leadership development programs. With that, thank you so much, Paul, for your time today. We really appreciate you joining the session.
Thank you so much, you guys. Bye.